before they wrote his name in whispers, before the scrolls lied and the legends blurred, there was only a man, carved by chains, forged in silence, dragged across oceans into a world that had never seen skin like his and never expected it to rise. I am Yasuke. This is not just a story. This is an experience. Put on your headphones, close your eyes, and step into the footsteps of Yasuke, the man who was never meant to be remembered, but became a legend they couldn't erase. Act 1. The Boy from Beyond the Dunes. I was not born in their scrolls, not written in their legends, not carved in the walls of their temples. Number 1 came from the other side of the silence, where men speak with their eyes, where the heat rises off the sand like smoke, and a boy learns to run before he learns to cry. I remember the dirt beneath my feet, hot, cracked, alive. I remember the weight of water jars on my shoulders, and the way my mother whispered songs to keep the dust from feeling too heavy. She had hands like bark, and a voice like sunrise. They never asked my name, only what I could lift, what I could carry, what I could survive. I became strong before I understood why strength mattered. I became quiet before I knew what silence could take from you. Then came the day the wind stopped moving, the day the birds vanished, the day the earth held its breath. I heard the fire first, then the screams, then nothing. When I woke, I was chained. Not just my wrists, my voice, my past. Everything that made me me was bound by steel and silence. I do not know how long I walked, across lands that did not remember me, through cities that looked down from cold towers. Men stared at me like I was not alive, like I was a shape, not a soul. They measured my arms, my back, my eyes, but never my pain. I slept on stone, ate scraps from hands that I'd never built. I learned the commands. Short, sharp, joyless. Yes, number lift. Kneel, obey. At night, I dreamed of lions, or the sound of drums in the distance, of a world that still knew my name. But in the waking world, my name was silence. And yet, one day our man came. He did not walk like the others, did not shout. He wore gold around his waist and light in his eyes. He stopped in front of me and simply looked. It was the first time I felt seen. Not inspected, not tested, seen. He asked if I remembered my name, and for a moment, I didn't. It had been buried under too many orders, too many punishments, too much forgetting. But then it came back like breath to a drowning man. I said it aloud, and I saw it land in his ears like thunder. He smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. He told me I was wasted here, that my strength belonged elsewhere, in a land far beyond the sea, where men bowed not out of fear, but honor, where swords danced like wind, where loyalty was sharper than steel. I did not understand, but I had nothing to lose but my chains, so I followed. The sea did not welcome me. It howled. It tore at the boat. It wanted to drag us under. The air stung with salt, thunder. Waves rose like mountains, but I did not kneel. I stood, still, wrapped in cloth soaked through with wind, watching, waiting. I had learned long ago, when you have no control, in master stillness, and so I survived. When we arrived, I saw a land made of mist, stone lanterns glowing in the dark like spirits, trees that wept pink petals, air that smelled of incense and iron, and the people, they stared. I was taller than all of them, darker than any shadow they had seen. My skin, a mirror they could not understand. My silence, a thunder they could not name. They called me strange. They called me beast. They called me demon. But the man who brought me, he called me warrior. That night I slept on the floor of a temple. It was not soft. It did not forgive. The stone was cold and smelled of centuries. The air was sharp, like blades in the lungs. And yet, it was the quiet that nearly broke me. I missed the chaos, the wildness, the dirt and drums and firelight. Here everything was still. Everything watched. Everything whispered. I curled my body in the dark, closed my eyes, and listened to the rain drip through the roof. Slow, steady, like a prayer. My chest rose and fell with effort. I did not cry, but I came close. They did not know me, did not want to. They saw the color of my skin before the shape of my spirit. But I would not leave this land invisible, not as a beast, not as a slave, not as a shadow in a story someone else wrote. If they feared demons, I would become one. End of Act 1. They named me Demon, but I was only a boy made of silence and sand. And if they feared what I might become, then they were right to. If you are enjoying this so far, make sure you press the subscribe button. I drop deep content like this weekly, and it will only get better from here. Act 2, The Sword and the Silence. They said nothing to me for days. No orders, no greetings, just stares. Long, sharp, cutting. I swept temple floors while monks passed me like mist. I poured water into bowls that were never lifted. I sat in the corner during prayers, while incense burned and chants echoed off stone walls, like ghost voices. And still, I was silent. Still, because I had learned long ago, when you are unseen, you listen. When you are feared, you wait. But the silence began to twist. It wasn't peace. It was pressure. Like the air itself resented me. When I walked past their scrolls, they clutched them tighter. When I breathed too loud, they paused their steps. When I slept, I felt eyes on me. Even in the dark, they didn't speak my language. But fear is fluent in all tongues. Then one morning, before the sun rose, a hand touched my shoulder. Firm, deliberate. It was the man who brought me here. He said nothing, just nodded toward the courtyard, and I followed. There, standing in the grey light, were warriors, men with shaved heads and sharp stances, clothed in silence, holding blades that looked too light to kill, until they moved. The gods did not move. The sword whispered through air like it had a soul. Steps so soft the dirt didn't notice. Eyes fixed, breaths measured. No emotion, only precision. And me, I stood on the edge, a shadow in a storm. He didn't understand. He pointed to a wooden blade on the ground, then to me. My fingers wrapped around it, unsure. The weight was foreign, not heavy, but alive, like holding a snake that hadn't decided whether to strike. It told me to mimic them. No words, only gestures. Raise, step, cut. Raise, step, cut. Again. And again, my arms burned, my legs shook. The blade slapped my shoulder more times than I could count. They laughed, quietly, as if I couldn't hear, but I did. I heard everything, and every bruise spoke to me like an old friend. I had known pain before, known humiliation. What they didn't understand was that I had never known surrender. I trained until the soles of my feet cracked, until my shirt clung to my back with sweat and blood, until even the silence began to respect me. And then, one of them stepped forward, not a wooden blade, steel. He bowed. A challenge. I didn't bow back. He struck first, quick, sharp, but he telegraphed his breath, and I had learned to listen. I moved, clumsy, but real. Steel missed flesh by inches. He came again. I deflected. The wooden blade snapped in my hand, but so did his balance. He fell. The courtyard stilled. No one laughed. And in that moment, they did not see a foreigner. They did not see a slave. They saw something they could not name. And that terrified them more than anything else. That night, they gave me food before the others. They didn't speak it aloud. But silence has its own way of bowing. I sat in my corner, a bowl of rice in hand, and for the first time in this cold, distant land, I felt warm. Not because they accepted me, but because they finally understood. I was not here to be tolerated. End of Act 2. I was here to become something they could never erase. A quick pause before the next chapter. If you are still here, you are clearly in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and be prepared to hear more stories just like this one. Word travels fast in still places. By morning, the temple buzzed like a hive. I wasn't called by name, but they no longer looked past me. Eyes lingered. Whispers filled the corners. Even the monks paused their footsteps. They said a man was coming. A lord. A war maker. A king of men who bowed to no emperor and feared no god. They called him Nobunaga. I didn't know the name. Didn't understand the weight it carried. But I felt it. Like thunder under my ribs. When his soldiers arrived, they didn't knock. They moved like smoke. Sharp armor, straight backs, hands never far from the hilts of their swords. One looked at me and did not blink. He gestured. A single nod. I was to follow. The walk was long, through narrow stone paths, past walls that whispered history, past people who stepped aside, not out of courtesy but curiosity. Children stared at my skin like it was fire. Old men whispered prayers, women bowed with uncertain eyes. But no one dared stop me. We entered a hall carved from ambition. Paintings of dragons and war. Swords hung like promises. Silence thick as fog. And there, on the far end, he sat. Oda Nobunaga. He did not rise. He didn't need to. His presence stood taller than his frame. Eyes like steel that had tasted flame. Hair tied with precision. One hand resting on the hilt of his blade. Not out of fear, but habit. He looked at me, and I looked back. No bow, no smile. Just recognition. Not of race, not of styles, but of will. He spoke through a translator. Asked where I was from. I told him. Beyond the dunes, across the black waters, from a land where the sun burns the truth into your bones. He asked if I could fight. I said nothing. Only stepped forward and raised my fists. He laughed. Not mockingly, but like a man who had just seen a wolf walk into his house. He ordered a sparring match. 3 of his gods stepped forward. Not out of cruelty, but curiosity. They had never seen someone like me. They wanted to know if the stories were true. I did not disappoint them. The first came fast. I came faster. The second tried to flank. He fell harder. The third, clever, tried to wait. But patience is only a weapon if you understand your enemy. I cracked the air with my fist. He didn't rise. Nobunaga stood, walked toward me, closer than anyone had dared. And then, he touched my shoulder, spoke words I couldn't understand. But my heart did. They meant, you are mine now. My warrior, my blade in the dark. He gave me a name. Not a slave name. Not a nickname. A title. Yasuke. That night I did not sleep on the temple floor. I slept in quarters, meant for men who carried swords, men who rode into fire, men whose names were written down. For the first time, I was not a shadow. I was a story. The Fe'ar Baigis. End of Act 3. End of Act 3. He gave me no chains, only a name. And for the first time, I felt less like a shadow and more like a storm. Act 4. A blade among shadows. They dressed me in armor, not the full plates of the generals, but the lighter scales, built for speed and control. Black lacquer, red lining, a symbol, stitched in gold at the shoulder. Nobunaga's crest. I looked at myself in the polished metal. It was the first time I had seen my own reflection in months, maybe years, and I didn't recognize the man staring back. Gone was the boy from the dunes. Gone was a servant, sweeping temple floors. I had become something else, not fully one of them, but no longer who I was before. A blade, forged in two worlds. It taught me their ways, how to bow, how to kneel with honor, how to walk with silence and strike without warning. I learned to tie my sword to my waist, not as a weapon, but as a second spine. I learned their stances, their breathing, their rituals before battle, the way they wrote their wills before marching. It was strange how calmly they prepared to die. The men trained with me. Some still whispered, some still watched, but none stepped forward like before. They had seen what I could do, and in the way of warriors, that was enough. One of them, a younger soldier named Konta, began to speak to me without fear. He didn't flinch at my skin, didn't lower his eyes when I passed. He told me of his family, of the wars he'd seen, of the lords who lied, and the peasants who bled. And one night, he handed me his second blade, a short dagger, black handle, no engraving, just worn leather and weight. He said, "You carry this now, not because you belong, but because anyone who faces you should know they face death twice." I didn't respond. I just took the blade, and that night, I cleaned it until it shot like memory. Nobunaga trusted me, brought me into meetings of men who ruled with fire. I stood behind him, silent, watching lords argue over maps and promises. Some refused to look at me. Others looked too long. I could feel it in their silence, in the stiffness of their shoulders, in the way they said "your man" instead of my name. They saw me as a symbol, a trick, a bitter, a test. But Nobunaga, he saw me as iron, unbreakable, unshaped. But he gave me orders no one else could fulfill. To ride alone into villages that demand loyalty. To stand at his right hand during executions. To carry his messages with the weight of 100 swords behind them. And I obeyed. Not because I was his servant, but because I believed in his war. He wanted to end the old ways, burn the rot, unite the clans under something real, and I wanted to see a world that made room for men like me. Men who didn't ask to be born foreign, but refused to die forgotten. But in every quiet place, shadows gather, and I began to feel them, in the side glances, in the too polite smiles, in the absence of contact during training, in the rumors that slid through the halls like smoke, whispers of betrayal, of generals sharpening their blades behind closed doors, of war not just at the borders, but inside the very walls we stood in. Even Nobunaga's tone changed, sharper, less patient, like he was carrying a fire that couldn't be put out anymore. One night, he called me to his chamber. No guards, just him and me. He poured sake into 2 cups, offered me one. He didn't smile, didn't speak. We sat in silence, and then he said, "They fear what they do not understand. You are not their enemy, Yasuke, but you will always be their threat." I nodded. He didn't need to say more. I understood. In a land of paper doors and delicate rules, I was thunder. I was rain. I was the crack in their illusion of control. And Nobunaga, he was the storm that would drown them all. End of Act 4. Act 5. The Fire Within the Walls. They always say the enemy comes from the outside, a foreign army, a rival clan, a faceless threat. But the truth is, it's always someone you know, someone you shared meals with, someone who laughed beside you, someone who waited until the door was half open to drive the blade in. It began with a silence that didn't feel right. The temple was too still, no footsteps. No prayers, no birds. I rose from my bed and felt the floor cold beneath my feet. The kind of cold that warns you. Something is dying today. I heard it before I saw it. The clash of steels, the cry of men, and then the unmistakable sound of fire leaking its way through wood like it was born for this. I grabbed my sword and ran. Smoke rolled through the corridors like ghosts, suffocating, blinding, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. Dead men lined the hallways. Some I had trained with, some I had laughed with, some I had just begun to trust. They turned on him, Akechi Mitsuhide, a general, a traitor, once Nobunaga's right hand, now the architect of his downfall. They stormed the temple in the dead of morning, setting fire to every scroll, every memory, every sacred piece of history. I got down 2 men in the doorway. The third gashed my shoulder before I dropped him. I was bleeding smoke, eyes stinging, but I kept going. I found Nobunaga in the inner chamber. He was not dressed in armor, no helmet, no blade, just robes, soaked in ash and sweat. Face calm, eyes distant. He looked at me like he already knew, like the future had already ended in his mind. I trusted him, he said, voice low, breaking. I gave him everything, and still he chose betrayal. I stepped forward, blade raised. "Then let me take you out of here." He shook his head. "Number, if I run now, I become a myth, not a man. And Japan doesn't need more ghosts. It needs a warning." He handed me a scroll, a seal marked in crimson wax. "Take this, ride, find my son, tell him what happened. Tell him to remain loyal." I hesitated. I was his shield, his shadow, his warrior. But he gave me a look I will never forget. He said, "You are not just my soldier. You are the witness. I bowed, not because I had to, but because I would never see him again. I turned, but before I left, I heard the soft draw of his sword behind me. A single strike. When I reached the courtyard, the fire had consumed half the temple. Soldiers swarmed the grounds. Screams, steel, chaos. I moved like a ghost, cut through the flames. Blood on my blade, ash on my skin, a name on my lips. Nobunaga. I rode through the forest alone, wind in my ears, pain in my ribs. The seal tucked beneath my robes, and behind me, the only place I had ever belonged, now turned to ash. That night I did not sleep. I sat beneath the trees, sword beside me, eyes open, and I asked the gods, what becomes of a weapon when the hand that held it is gone? End of Act 5. I was not a servant. I was his witness. And when the flames came, I carried his name through them. Act 6. The final march. I wandered for days. No map, no allies, no sleep. Just dust. The kind that clings to your skin, never lets go. Like grief. I followed the rivers, hoping to reach Nobunaga's son, but the world moved faster than I could. By the time I arrived, the clans had scattered, the war had shifted, and the future we bled for was already being rewritten by cowards with the ink. No one wanted to hear of the Black Samurai. No one wanted to believe I stood by his side as the fire took him. They took the scroll, they took the name, but they would not take me. I was captured days later, not on a battlefield, not with honor, just in a quiet village, trying to rest. Akechi's men dragged me through the mud like I was still in chains, but I did not scream. I had given the world enough of my voice. They took my sword, mocked the weight of it, said I was too large for this land, too dark for their scrolls, too strange to be remembered. But what they never understood is this. I was never fighting to be remembered. I was fighting to exist, to leave something behind that could not be erased, not with ink, not with fire, not with silence. They brought me before the new rulers, cowards in robes, too fine for their spine. They debated whether I should be killed, a public death, a warning, or perhaps a disappearance, something neat, something quiet. I stood in chains, and I looked them each in the eye, not with hatred, but with something deeper, pity, because I knew something they didn't. History is not written by the victors, it is written by the survivors, and I was still breathing. They chose exile, cowards always do, too afraid to kill what they don't understand, too proud to admit they feared me. They stripped my armor, banished me from the court, tried to erase my name, but every soldier I passed remembered. Every peasant I helped along the road remembered. The children who saw me standing tall among their lords remembered. And so, I walked, from village to village, mountain to mountain, not as a samurai, not as a warrior, but as a man. I never told my story, not in full. Some of it was too heavy, some of it too sacred, but I watched it spread, like wind carrying sparks, like the drums of my homeland beating beneath the silence of this land. They say I disappeared, vanished into mist, that I died forgotten. But how can I be forgotten when every man who carries a blade dreams of something greater? You may not see my statue, may not read my name in your books, but if you close your eyes and hear the rain fall through the trees, if you ever feel the weight of silence before a fight, if you ever walk into a room and feel 1,000 stairs pressing down, and yet you stand tall, then know this: I was here, I walked through fire, I knelt before no one. I was not born in their scrolls, but I became their legend.